Hello, everybody. Welcome to the e-learning video on Introduction to Safeguarding Standards for Project Implementation. I'm Anita Williams, a human rights lawyer and international safeguarding consultant with Bridging Worlds Consulting Limited, based in London, and it is my pleasure to bring this short presentation to you. I hope you find it helpful and useful. The presentation will come with some assignments for you to also continue your learning. So in terms of content for this e-learning video, we have the objectives, some definitions, a little bit of background into safeguarding in the international development sector, an introduction to safeguarding standards, implementation of these standards at project level, and a short conclusion. So let's start with objectives. So at the end of the video, it is our hope that you as the learner will understand your role and responsibilities to keep people safe. 2, identify safeguarding concerns and mitigate against risks. 3, once you're introduced to the standards, to think about benchmarking your organizational policies against the safeguarding standards. And 4, be able to identify concerns and respond to them appropriately. So let's start with a little bit about definition. When we talk about safeguarding people in international development, this really is about an organizational duty of care to ensure no harm or injury occurs to people whom the organization comes into contact with. This means that all organizations should put measures into place to identify, prevent, respond to harm. In terms of background, we can actually trace the issues of keeping people safe in the last 20 years. It started off very much in West Africa when you had sex scandals that were being highlighted in the press, that women and children were being sexually exploited and abused by UN personnel. It was then that the UN brought about the first code of conduct known as the UN Secretary General's Bulletin on the prevention or protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. If your organization was to work with the UN, this document is still alive and well and is incorporated into partnership agreements. It wasn't until about 5 years later when it was NGO workers who were sexually exploiting and abusing women and children, particularly in South Sudan, Cote d'Ivoire, and Haiti. It was then that international NGOs then developed their child protection policies and codes of conduct to make it clear to staff and other personnel that they could not misconduct themselves in this way. But the real watershed moment did not come about till 2018, where several well-known organizations, particularly here in the UK, when it was highlighted that whistleblowers had gone to the press and highlighted the issues of senior members of staff of a certain organization that was allegedly sexually exploiting and abusing beneficiaries in Haiti. This was closely followed by another well-known international organization here in the UK, where there was allegations around senior members of staff who were sexually harassing members of staff within this organization. Then began actually during the year of 2018 and 2019, other whistleblowers going to the press about highlighting issues within the organization, so workplace issues, as well as external to the organization, the sexual abuse and exploitation of not only staff, but certainly of vulnerable beneficiaries. And as a consequence of that, there has been certain international standards that have come into play, which we will examine later in this video. So in terms of your first assignment, I would like you to reflect on some of the questions that I will share with you. Here are 3 questions. Why does harm such as abuse, exploitation, and harassment happen within international and national NGOs? What organizational measures can be put in place to prevent harm from occurring? How should organizations respond to safeguarding concerns which are reported? You are welcome to pause the video at this time to reflect on these questions and think about your answers. Welcome back. So, safeguarding needs to be seen very much as an organizational risk. It does not sit in programs or other teams of the organization alone. It needs to be seen as high up as other prohibited practices, such as fraud, corruption, extremism, all these other issues that we are exposed to. So, safeguarding, keeping people safe, needs to be seen high up on an organizational agenda. And I'd like to illustrate this in the form of an umbrella. So you will see at the bottom of the umbrella on the left-hand corner, abuse occurs due to the misuse of position, power, authority, or trust by staff or representatives of the organization. And it cuts across everything an organization does. So you will see at the top corner of the umbrella, recruitment and HR processes is such an important component to prevent those who may have perpetrated sexual exploitation and abusing from joining your organization. How you use visuals and personal information from vulnerable communities, beneficiaries, participants, as well as other members who you may come across is also equally important, because how we use images, videos, where we put them, whether it's social media, on our websites, all that actually can create harm or additional harm. How we deal with issues of safety and security, certainly a safeguarding concern, can give rise to a high risk situation for not only staff, but certainly partner staff. Whistleblowing processes must include also the opportunity for staff and beneficiaries to whistleblow external to the organization, including, not only the financial mismanagement, but also and criminal matters, but certainly for high risk safeguarding concerns. How we treat people is an important part of safeguarding. So we need to discuss the issues of bullying, harassment, particularly sexual harassment. Certainly, the misuse of power and trust and that brings about different forms of abuse and exploitation. How we develop our code of conduct, how we promote our code of conduct is very, very important. And how we ensure that safeguarding is part of our wider risk management processes is also important. And this is not about just safeguarding concerns external to the organization, but certainly internal to the organization and its activities. Procurement of suppliers, third parties, contractors, consultants is also important when we use the safeguarding lens, and how we work with partners. So, do we include safeguarding clauses in our partnership agreements, in our MOUs to ensure that everybody understands the importance of safeguarding? And you will see in the middle of the umbrella, we're talking about the support and well-being of children, all persons under the age of 18, in line with Article 1 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Adults, or sometimes because they're known as vulnerable adults, because they have certain criteria which makes them more vulnerable. So this could be because of age, gender, disability, sex or sexuality, or different medical or health conditions. Staff, and that is all persons who are contracted or engaged with our organization, and representatives, so all those who may volunteer, interns, board members, advisors. There's a whole range of other people who represent the organization, and we have a duty of care to them, and they have a duty of care to others. And then you will see at the top end of the umbrella, we're working towards what is known as a survivor-centered approach. And what that looks like is that decisions need to be taken in the best interest of survivor victims, and not just focused on name and reputation of the organization, because we've seen in the past some of the cases that we talked about earlier, those decisions where the focus has been name and reputation have not put survivors in the center of their decision making. So, what then are the international safeguarding standards? I will now play for you a short video which was developed for an open university course that I led on called Introduction to Safeguarding. And this course is currently still open if you want to use it. It's a free course, and you can download it on the resources link, which is below this video.
Thanks for the question, Shireen. There are some key international standards that we should all know about. The ones most commonly used in the development and humanitarian sector are United Nations Secretary-General's Bulletin on Protecting from Sexual Exploitation and Abuse, the Interagency Standing Committee Task Force, 6 Principles on Protecting from Sexual Abuse, Core Humanitarian Standard, the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office Enhanced Due Diligence Standards, and there are other standards as well, such as the Keeping Children Safe and Accountability to Affected Populations. International safeguarding standards, such as the UN Secretary-General's Bulletin and the IASC PSEA 6 Principles, create the minimum standards of behavior we would expect of all our people. These standards apply to everyone, whether they're staff, associates, or partners who represent us wherever they may be working or living, regardless of what the culture is. For example, it's not okay to have sex with a child under the age of 18, even if that's acceptable behavior in that society or under national law. Mistaken belief regarding the age of a child is not a defense. Exchange of money, employment, goods, or services for sex, including sexual favors or other forms of humiliating, degrading, or exploitative behavior is prohibited. Any sexual relationship between organizational workers and someone who benefits from assistance where there is improper use of rank or position is prohibited. Such relationships undermine the credibility and integrity of humanitarian work. Organizational workers must report safeguarding concerns or suspicions through agency reporting mechanisms. All workers, particularly managers, should create and maintain a safe working environment and promote the implementation of their code of conduct. It's really important to ensure that these principles, amongst the other international safeguarding standards, underpin organizational safeguarding policies and codes of conduct.
So you would have seen there a range of different international standards, which I introduced, and the 6 core principles which should underpin all codes of conduct. Something else to also bring to your attention is Clause 5.6 or Commitment 5 under the Core Humanitarian Standard, if you're a member of CHS, is on complaints and feedback, and these should be encouraged and welcomed, and communities should be made aware of what is expected behavior of not just humanitarian staff, but also development staff, including protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. So what that means is to have clear, accessible, confidential complaints mechanisms in not only just sitting, in the head offices of international or national NGOs, but also at community level where your beneficiaries can access it. Another standard that was included in that list just now was the FCDO, or Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office Enhanced Due Diligence Standards. The reason why I've highlighted this is because as a consequence of the sex scandals that broke out in early part of 2018, the UK government brought these out, which is to guide organizations that receive funding from the UK government. You will see here 6 pillars. 1 is safeguarding, 2 whistleblowing, 3 HR or human resources, 4 risk management, 5 code of conduct, and 6 governance. Now, there's 6 pillars, and the criteria underneath that have also been looked at and adopted and signed up to by a range of 22 other governments, including the German government and including the European Union. And for a better look into what the criteria is, you can also download this list from the resources link below this video. So for your second assignment, there is a benchmarking checklist exercise. And what I'd like you to do is to have access to whether you have a safeguarding policy or a PSEA policy, your recruitment and human resources policy, your code of conduct, your reporting framework, and your complaints or whistleblowing policy. If you have this available, please download the checklist below so that you can go through the checklist and to see, whether the criteria in that checklist has been met, unmet, or partially met. If it has been partially met or unmet, you can then think about what are the risks and gaps in your current policies and procedures and what needs to be done in order to bridge that gap. And what's important about that is obviously the higher the risk, the higher the likelihood of harm occurring. So it's really important to think about how to improve your policies and procedures and also your implementation of these policies and procedures to keep people safe. So number 5, we need to talk about, well, how then do you implement the safeguarding standards? So number 1 is identifying risks. So doing the benchmarking exercise in assignment 2 was a relevant point. So identifying risk in policies and procedures, but also identifying the forms of harm prior to any program activity. Then mitigating against those risks. So prevention, what can be done to mitigate against the forms of harm that are likely to happen? Because if they're likely to happen, then the impact of them happening can actually be very, very high. So undertaking risk assessments, putting in place safe recruitment processes, ensuring there is a clear code of conduct that everybody has been trained on so that they understand what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior are some of the preventative measures. Then having clear complaints or whistleblowing processes that are accessible and safe and trusted by all persons who come into contact with the organization in order to report concerns. How the organization responds to these concerns are equally important. What's an appropriate response? What is not an appropriate response? So an appropriate response would be timeliness, ensuring it's survivor-centered in approach, ensuring that there's some form of mapping that has been done of services available in and around the project site so that survivors' needs and wishes can be seen to. And then, this is where your safeguarding lead and or focal persons can be looking at monitoring concerns that are coming in and learning from any past mistakes, particularly if an investigation has ensued and there are recommendations coming out from those investigations. So thinking about project implementation and looking at it in these different phases will be helpful in any project that you may be implementing at a local level, country level, or across the globe, depending on how you work. So assignment 3 is a fun one. So these are 2 case studies here that we provided. Feel free to pause the video after reading the case study. There are suggested solutions that are available for download below this video, but I would suggest that you try and do the case study first, answer the questions, and then have a look at the suggested solution. Case study 1, you are a project officer for a youth-focused project. You hear a rumor about a new finance officer who started his job 2 weeks ago. Apparently, he was fired from his last job for inappropriate behavior with some young beneficiaries. Question 1, are you concerned? Question 2, what harm do you think may have occurred, and may it still occur? Question 3, what could have prevented this officer from being hired in your project in the first place? Question 4, what next steps would you take? Pause the video now and think about these questions. Welcome back. Case study 2. You work for a local organization that supports vulnerable communities suffering from the impact and effects of HIV and AIDS. The INGO that financially supports your organization asks you to accompany their research consultant to visit your programs. During the visit, she takes photos on her smartphone of vulnerable beneficiaries. She names them in her social media posts and uploads them on her social media pages. Are you concerned? What and who are you concerned about? Question 2, what harm do you think may have occurred? Question 3, what could have been prevented this researcher from acting in this way? And question 4, what next steps would you take? Pause the video now and answer the questions. So we now reach our conclusion. Prevention is key. Risk assess all your activities. Go through your HR processes and ensure they are more robust in keeping people safe by ensuring that perpetrators of previous activities are not being rehired into your programs and your operations. Ensure that safeguarding policies and codes of conduct are signed and understood by all through mandatory training and monitoring of practice. Report all safeguarding concerns to a safeguarding lead or safeguarding officer. Now, that could be 1 or 2 persons at senior management level where concerns are reported to. Organizations should respond by being clear on your responsibilities to respond appropriately to safeguarding concerns, and do this with the support of the safeguarding officer. Now, for all staff members, your responsibility is to report. It is not your responsibility to start investigating on your own. Please don't do that. It is the safeguarding lead or safeguarding officer who needs to delegate that responsibility. Learn from all processes and ensure that learning is incorporated back into policies, procedures, and practice so that we can continue to keep people safe by preventing harm in the first place. And last but not least, you can have policies and procedures in place, but what's really important is to cultivate accountability in organizational culture so that we say no to any other form of harm. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Shun, Asante Sana, merci, gracias. If you need to reach us, we are at bridgingworldsconsulting@gmail.com. And don't forget to download the e-learning test by scanning the QR code. Thank you very much.